That's right. Oh, I thought that was. No, no, baby. Yeah. Yeah. So, needless to say, but there. Yeah, no. I know, that's I did. I did. You all got quiet. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Parker-Fedewa, and I'm a two-time alumna of Marquette's Graduate School and a Leadership Council member of the Association of Marquette University Women, AMUW. I hope that you enjoyed the reception. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2025 Eleanor H. Boheim Distinguished Lecture. This annual event is offered by the AMUW and is a unique opportunity to hear from our distinguished feature speaker. How does one calculate a work of art's greatness, vis-a-vis the potential criminality of the artist who created it? To what extent are we complicit with an artist's monstrosity when we consume his or her work? What's the cost of genius? Can we simply wish away our love for a piece of art? These are all questions that tonight's speaker interrogates. More on all these big questions shortly. Tonight's lecture was made possible by the generosity of the late Mary Boheim Finnegan. Knowing the many ways in which this lecture series would carry forward the Marquette mission, Mary endowed the program in honor of her mother, Eleanor H. Boheim. This wonderful family legacy is a true blessing for our community, carried forward now by Mary's daughter, Nora Finnegan Wera. Although unable to join us this evening, Nora is dedicated to this tradition, which enables us to continue celebrating women scholars. We're deeply grateful for her family's vision and generosity. Since 1938, the AMUW has been the difference for Marquette women, a centerpiece for alumni, parents, and students. AMUW supports programmatic offerings such as tonight's lecture, while celebrating student scholarship and the accomplishments of Marquette alumni and students. It is a blessing to serve on the AMUW Leadership Council in promoting others in our community. Before we begin tonight's lecture, I would also like to recognize and thank Dr. Heather Hathaway, Interim Dean of the Klinger College of Arts and Sciences and the College of Education, and the members of the AMUW Boheim Lecture Committee. Together with our chair, Dr. Allison Efford, I had the pleasure to serve alongside committee members, Drs. Tara Daly, Melissa Gantz, and Kate Ward, as well as Emily Roadcap. Let's thank them. To continue the 6th-year tradition of the Eleanor H. Boheim Distinguished Lecture, I'll now turn the podium over to Dr. Allison Efford, Associate Professor of History at Marquette University, who will introduce this year's distinguished speaker. Allison?
Thank you, Rebecca. And of course, Emily, who always sort of works her magic behind the scenes. And this evening, we also are really lucky to have Kylie Brockway, who is helping with videography. And Jolene Chrysler has been really supportive with logistics too. When I am introducing a speaker at Marquette, it is usually a fellow historian, right? Someone who I know personally. It is harder to introduce a big time best-selling author. So my relationship to Claire Dederer is through her work. I am a fan, and I think that she would agree that that's a perfectly legitimate, if not unproblematic, right, like form of relationship. But it does mean that I can't give you anecdotes about how she helped me decipher some 19th century handwriting or track down some obscure source. Of course, it doesn't let me off the hook totally. I do still need to introduce her. So Claire Dederer was raised in Seattle and attended the University of Washington. She started off as a film critic before moving into long-form journalism on a variety of topics for the country's best-known periodicals. Her previous books include Poser, My Life in 23 Yoga Poses, and Love and Trouble, A Midlife Reckoning. She's won many awards, including just last week from the University of Southern California, the Chowdhury Prize in Literature. So we are thrilled to have her here today to talk about monsters, a fan's dilemma. Please join me in welcoming Claire Dederer.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to take my glasses off and look at you for a second. Okay. It's nice to be here. I wanted to start just by doing my own thank yous. I wanted to thank Rebecca and Allison for their introductions, and especially thank Allison and the rest of the committee for all their hard work in bringing me here and their flexibility in bringing me here to deliver the Boheim lecture. I'm honored to be here. Many, many thanks, I'm going to get this right, to the Association of Marquette University Women. I got all the nouns in the right order. I'm so honored that you had me. It means a lot. And thanks to you all for coming out, and thanks to the fab undergrads for helping get us all organized and explaining how things work, because of course we don't know. All right, so I'm going to talk tonight about this question of monsters and what to do about them. I'm going to talk about my book, Monsters: A Fan's Dilemma, and try to bring some of the strands of that book together for you in one talk and kind of talk our way through this problem. So I'll start off just by talking about some of the people we think of when we use this word monsters. Pablo Picasso, Roman Polanski, Woody Allen, Bill Cosby, William Burroughs, Richard Wagner, Sid Vicious, V.S. Naipaul, John Galliano, Norman Mailer, Ezra Pound, Caravaggio, and on and on. Add your own, add a new one every week, every day. Charlie Rose, Carl Andre, Johnny Depp. The awful thing that these people have done disrupts the great work. We can't watch or listen to or read their great work without remembering the awful thing they said or did. Flooded with our knowledge of the maker's monstrousness, we turn away overcome by disgust. Maybe ideally that's what we do, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we continue watching, separating or trying to separate the artist from the art. Either way, our experience of the work is disrupted, whether we sort of want it to be or not. Something's happened that comes between us and the work when we come to know of one of these rotten things one of these people has done. So what do we do? How do we separate the maker from the made? Do we undergo a willful forgetting when we decide to listen to Wagner's Ring Cycle? And forgetting is easier for some than for others. Wagner's work has rarely been performed in Israel since 1938. Or do we believe genius gets special dispensation, a behavioral hall pass? And is it just a matter of pragmatics? Do we withhold our support if the person is alive and therefore might benefit financially from our consumption of their work? Do we vote with our wallets? Is it okay to, say, stream a Roman Polanski movie for free? Can we watch it at a friend's house? Should we sneak into the museum to see the Picasso show? I'm going to talk tonight about what happens when audiences come to a work of art with knowledge of these misdeeds and what might be done. I'll start talking more generally about how I've approached this problem and how I've come to define my terms as I explore these issues, and then we'll circle back around to the question, what to do with this art of monstrous men. And of course, we do have to ask the same question about women, but frankly, we're just not going to tonight. You can bring it up in the Q&A if you want. There's definitely, I have a lot to say on the subject. I'll take questions at the end of my talk. I became interested in this topic in 2014. It all began on a rainy spring day when I found myself locked in a lonely, imaginary battle with an appalling genius. I was researching Roman Polanski for a book I was writing, and I found myself awed by his monstrousness. It was monumental, like the Grand Canyon, huge and void-like and slightly incomprehensible. And I'm going to give a trigger warning. I'm going to be talking about child rape in this next paragraph, so know that. On March 10th, 1977, and I can recite these details from memory, Roman Polanski brought Samantha Gailey to his friend Jack Nicholson's house in the Hollywood Hills. He urged her into a jacuzzi, encouraged her to strip, gave her a quaalude, and then took her into another building and anally raped her. All of these facts sort of pile up, all of the details piled up, but you're left with this simple fact of the rape of a 13-year-old. And I looked at it really deeply. I read the depositions. I researched the crime, and there's a lot available on it because he was convicted in America before he fled for France. So I knew, and I was writing this book that, not the book I'm talking about now, but a previous book that talked about Polanski. So I knew about the crime in a really deep way, and yet I was still able to consume the work. In fact, I still loved the work. Throughout the spring and summer of 2014, I watched the films, and their beauty was its own kind of monument, impervious to my knowledge of his crime. I was not supposed to love this work. He was the object of boycotts and lawsuits and outrage. And yet here I was watching Rosemary's Baby, Chinatown on the couch in my living room. Repulsion, Chinatown, Rosemary's Baby, all still incredible films. If you haven't watched them recently and you can bring yourself to stomach watching them, they're incredible. It's hard to imagine a scene of greater coziness and safety. My house sat in the middle of a field, in the middle of the woods, in the middle of an almost entirely crime-free island. The living room faced south and was flooded with light even on the gloomiest Pacific Northwest afternoon. The room was furnished haphazardly, frankly a bit shabbily, and filled with books and paintings. It was the kind of room that would be recognized the world over as the living quarters of a culture worker, maybe some of those in this room, or at least a culture lover. It was a room that suggested all those books, that human problems could be solved by the application of careful thought and considered ethics. It was a humanist room. I mean, if you were in a certain mood, you could call it a room descended from the Enlightenment. That's a lot for a room to signify, especially when the bookshelves are from IKEA. But it was clear to see in this room, everything could be solved by thinking. And yet, the more I thought about it, it didn't work. I thought, and I could not come to a conclusion. And I began to read on the history of the sort of ethics of how we consume art. And what I often found was just this exhortation to separate the art from the artist. And beyond that, I didn't find a lot of further complexity about the experience of the audience in that moment. And to me, that didn't seem like any kind of solution at all. So I continued to think about the problem. And I thought, I was still thinking through the lens of Polanski. And how many people in this room have seen a Polanski film? Oh, wow, that is very unusual. Wow. Okay, that's a lot. Most people, he's fallen out of favor for obvious reasons. So Polanski would be no problem for the viewer at all. Just another example of how some men happen to be black holes if the films were bad, but they're not. There is no other contemporary figure who balances these two forces so equally, the absoluteness of the monstrosity and the absoluteness of the genius. Polanski made Chinatown often called the greatest film of all time. Polanski drugged and raped 13-year-old Samantha Gailey. There the facts sit, irreconcilable. How could I maintain myself between these contradictions? My comfy living room couch had become an uneasy chair. I didn't know what to do about Polanski, and I did feel somewhat obscurely that something needed to be done. Could I or should I watch the work? I began to write on the subject. And I thought that this was something that I was just doing for my own entertainment. It was like a hobby that I was just going to keep writing on this, keep doing research on it. You know, I've been a writer and made my living as a writer for a long time. So I know when something is really juicy subject matter. And I knew there was a lot here, but I could not imagine it would be of interest to anyone besides me. And I certainly did not, I couldn't imagine I could ever write or, heaven knows, sell a book about it. But I kept writing on it anyway, because it spoke deeply to me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then in October 2017 came the initial wave of the more publicized Me Too accusations. Of course, Me Too had existed for a long time in the work of Tarana Burke, but these were more mainstream Me Too accusations. And it was really, something had to break through, and what broke through was Weinstein. That is what happened in the October 2017, and suddenly all of these accusations were coming out. And I thought, okay, this is, I need to publish some of this work, even though it's really scary, and even though I don't really believe in hot takes, I'm gonna step in and publish this first chapter of the book. And so I did. I published it as an essay in the Paris Review titled, "What Do We Do with the Art of Monstrous Men?" And it was a really fascinating experience. It asked this question and it moved through some of the material I've already shared with you and tried to think through the ethical and moral complications of this problem. A thing that was interesting about stepping into this moment was that I had been writing on this for a solid 2 years when I dropped this online essay. And it was a really fascinating experience as an artist and also as a citizen, because people really liked it. And what they liked about it was nuance. They liked the fact that I didn't sort of, they liked what they could feel, which is that I'd spent this time thinking about it. They could sense that. And we're in this moment where there's so many really strong opinions shared in a certain kind of way, in this sort of attention-seeking way. And for me as a writer to discover that this work that I'd thought about so deeply, that people responded to nuance, I just couldn't believe it. But even more than that, you know, you have to remember what it was like in October 2017. It was not a period of nuance, much as we find ourselves in right now. And as a citizen, I actually was so cheered up by this experience of people having a complex and dynamic relationship to this question, and being open to what I was doing. So I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying it was like it was a really exciting thing to think that you can come with complexity and people will respond if it's genuine. And so I went on from there, encouraged by that, to work on my book, Monsters, which asked, what do we do with the art of monstrous men? And that question, sorry, I'll go back. On the essay, what do we do with the art of monstrous men? I did not write that headline. It was written by an editor at the Paris Review. And it immediately became much copied. It was used, what do we do with the science of science men? You know, it was sort of on every front. And it's not a question I asked, but I think it's sort of pushed me into an uncomfortable position for a while because it was so focused on what do we do? And I'm not sure that that's the most interesting thing, and I'm not sure it's what this book is necessarily about. What I'm really interested in is, you know, I get to what do we do eventually. But what I'm really interested in is that disruption, is that way that our experience of the art changes in that moment when we know something, maybe something we didn't even want to know. So if you take, for instance, and we always do, Michael Jackson as an example, even if you didn't see the documentary, you would know some of what was in the documentary. There's this way that biography is this is the stuff of the economy we live inside, the attention economy, the information economy, what Shoshana Zuboff has called the age of capitalist or surveillance capitalism, right, where we're all watching each other. That's what biography is. We share our biographies. We consume other people's biographies, whether we want to or not. We cannot get away from it. So we come to know stuff about people, whether we really are setting out to know it or not. When I was young, I'm 58, when I was young, you had to really work to learn about an artist you loved. You know, you would be like waiting for the magazine to come out with an article about somebody whose music you liked, but now you can't not know. So we're sort of in this position where even if we don't want to know, we do, because that's the economy we live inside of. So what do we do? I think the question is really, I started to think about it and I thought what I wanted to do was less be an expert telling people what to do. And I wanted to write from a more kind of profound place of subjectivity. And what I realized I wanted to do was write an autobiography of the audience. I wanted, I've written 2 memoirs, I've done a lot of personal writing, a lot of personal essays, and I wanted to kind of get inside and inhabit the feeling tone of what it is to be an audience member who has come to this kind of knowledge. If I were writing an honest autobiography of the audience of the work of monstrous men, that autobiography would need to balance 2 elements, the greatness of the work and the terribleness of the crime. I wished, in fact, that someone would invent an online calculator. The user would enter the name of an artist, whereupon the calculator would assess the heinousness of the crime versus the greatness of the art and spit out a verdict. You could or could not consume the work of this artist. And I did flirt when I was just getting ready to publish the book with having my child produce this calculator for me. And I just thought that's not the tone I necessarily need to set. A calculator is laughable, but somehow we have to make our moral sense come into balance with art love, with this love we have for this work that has saved us, that has been there for us, that has given us this relief that we needed in so many different moments. I wanted there to be a universal balance, a universal answer, though I suspected maybe that balance is different for everyone. A friend who was gang raped in high school says that any and all work by artists who've exploited and abused women should be destroyed. A gay friend whose adolescence was redeemed by art says that art and artists must be separated entirely. And of course, it's possible that both these people are right. We don't always love who or what we're supposed to love. Woody Allen himself famously quoted Emily Dickinson, "The heart wants what it wants," when he was talking about his relationship with Soon Yi. And I really made a strong bid to title the book, "The Heart Wants What It Wants," and they laughed me out of town. W.H. Auden said it much more nicely, as he said almost everything more nicely. The desires of the heart are as crooked as corkscrews. The desires of the audience's heart are as crooked as corkscrews. We continue to love what we ought to hate. We can't seem to turn the love off, and that is the problem, right? We're told to separate the art from the artist as if it's as easy as that, but we can't turn that love and that connection off, and we have this knowledge of the biography. All of these things are working inside of us. Authority says the work should remain untouched by the life. Authority says biography is fallacy. Authority believes the work exists in an ideal state, ahistorical, alpine, snowy, pure. Authority ignores the natural feeling that arises from biographical knowledge of a subject. Authority gets snippy about stuff like that. Authority claims it is able to appreciate the work free of biography, free of history. Authority sides with the white male maker against the audience. I noticed something. I noticed that I'm not ahistorical or immune to biography. That is for the winners of history. Simply being told that an artist's personal history shouldn't matter doesn't achieve the objective of making it not matter. Even if we want it to not matter, it just doesn't happen that way. And this goes to a quote actually from another monster, Hemingway, where he says that the job of the artist is not to write down how things are supposed to feel. You're not supposed to be writing down what you want to be feeling. Your job is to write down what you feel. And I think that that goes for the audience. We have to be alive for good or ill to how we actually feel about the work and how we feel about the biography that we come to know. I struggled with a new way to think about it. Part of the problem I found right away was the word monster. It's othering, it's totalizing. I realized that for me, over the past few years of thinking about Polanski, thinking about Woody Allen, the word monster had come to take on a new meaning. It's meant something more nuanced and something more elemental. It meant someone whose behavior disrupts our ability to apprehend the work on its own terms. A monster in my mind was an artist who cannot be separated from some dark aspect of his or her biography. I yearned for a different word, one that would be a more useful tool for exploring the questions that were arising for me and for others about the intersection of biography and art. And then I came to the word stain. I was messaging with a pal, a British historian and music critic, about the Michael Jackson problem. This was not long after the documentary had come out. He wrote to me, I am currently trying to do the aesthetico-moral calculus thing, Ray MJ's music, like, is the Jackson 5 stuff okay? But then in a different sense, that also involved child abuse, right? Or exploitation too, Michael himself. How about the don't stop till you get enough rock with you era? Surely he wasn't at it then. But does the stain work its way backwards through time? In practice, it's hard to resist the pull of music when you hear it out and about, like with Polanski films. And it was that mention, he just mentioned it in aside, does the stain travel backwards through time? And I thought, aha, the stain. The word monster is like a suitcase packed full of rage. The stain is something else again. The stain is just sad, indelibly sad. No one wants the stain to happen, it just does. We don't get to make decisions about the stain. It's already too late. It touches everything. Our understanding of the work has taken on a new color, whether we like it or not. The tainting of the work is less a question of philosophical decision making as it is a question of pragmatics or just plain reality. That's why the stain makes such a powerful metaphor. Its suddenness, its permanence, and above all, its inexorable realness. The stain is simply something that happens. The stain is not a choice. The stain is not a decision we make. Indelibility is not voluntary. When someone says we ought to separate the art from the artist, they're saying remove the stain, let the work be unstained, but that is not how stains work. We watch the glass fall to the floor. We don't get to decide whether the wine will spread across the carpet. Strange idiosyncratic personal rules arise from such knowledge. As he mentioned about Michael Jackson, I have much easier time watching films that Polanski made before the rape of Samantha Gailey. We wonder, how do we decide where to start and where do we stop? What we want to do is sort of give our money to that young Polanski before he did the crime. We want to bypass this like disgusting old criminal. We can't bypass our knowledge of what he's done. We can't bypass the stain. We can't travel in time. The problem is that we don't get to know how much we consume about somebody else. And so the stain comes into our understanding of the work. The stain spreading, creeping, wine dark, inevitable is biography's aftermath. The person does the crime and it's the work that gets stained. Authoritative criticism believes in the myth of the objective response to this work, a response entirely unshaped by feeling, emotion, subjectivity. A response free, in fact, of any kind of personal perspective. For a long time, for the white male critic, there was no need to question that response because the work was being made by someone like himself. The work was transmitted from one type of artist to the same type of viewer. In between was the same type of critic. The artist had an ideal audience. The audience has an ideal artist. The rest of us, not of that dyad, are outside. But that's not the concern of this artist and this viewer. We're not actively excluded, but we are not part of the dynamic. We could do the same in response, we who are not white men. We could make art centered around our own experiences and leave out the men who've been centralized for so long. And we could do that, and it wouldn't make the point necessarily that we want to make, which is that their point of view, the way they have placed themselves, is non-central. It's one point of view of many. Isn't it better as a viewer of art or as a critic of art to be aware of who you are, where you are from, and all that you bring to a piece of art? Better to acknowledge that you respond from who you are and how you feel. And I forgot to put up this picture of Michael Jackson, but we'll just say hi to him and keep moving. What feeling do you have that is not tied up with history? The late writer Randall Keenan asked this question at a 2019 talk at the University of Mississippi, and it's a line I think about all the time. Our feelings they feel sovereign, but they're tethered to our moment and our circumstance. When we come to the work and when we come to the biography with all these feelings, it's really important that we're able to acknowledge what's the cultural history, what's the material history that sits behind us as we have these feelings that feel like they're coming out of nowhere. It's important for a critic and it's important for an audience member to ask these things. I might ask Randall Keenan, what response, what opinion, what criticism do you have that is not tied up with history? We are subject to the forces of history and the biography we ourselves are living out in the conditions of that history. We think of ourselves as ahistorical subjects, but that's just not so. Donna Haraway says that objectivity is a conquering gaze from nowhere, an illusion, a God trick. Maybe we can think of subjectivity as a human trick. It's our job to be humans, not gods, to know who we are, where we came from, and where our subjectivity grows out of, rather than pretending that our point of view is dominant, is authoritative, knows all. We each bring our subjective experience to art and to love. If I were to give an exhaustive list of monsters and tell you my response to them, I would be acting out a kind of falsehood. I would be suggesting there is a correct answer in each particular case. I would be telling you what to think, and in telling you what to think, I would be telling you what to do. And I don't want to enshrine my subjectivity in that particular way. I don't want to cloak it in the garb of authority. Instead, I want, in this book and in my thinking, to model a kind of ownership of that subjectivity so that the audience can do that for themselves, for himself, for herself. Consuming a piece of art is two biographies meeting: the biography of the artist that might disrupt the consuming of the art, the biography of the audience member that might shape the viewing of the art. This occurs in every case. I noticed that a certain kind of person appeared to be immune to the stain. A certain kind of person demanded to be loved, expected to be loved, no matter how checkered his biography, and we all agreed he was worthy of love. This person was called the genius. We have him here. This person might be stained, in fact, almost always is stained, but the stain seems not to affect his importance and a primacy. The genius is a proposition. He's a fantasy that we have collectively. The genius isn't so much a kind of person as a status of person, a person who can do whatever he wants. A genius has special power, and with that power comes special dispensation. We count ourselves lucky he walks among us. Who are we to say that he must also behave himself? When it comes to balancing the greatness of the work against the badness of the deed, the word genius simply breaks the calculator. It's a glittering absolute set in a dreary, dutiful system of relative worth. And it's a way to kind of attach the notion of authority to your own subjective experience, right, of a piece of art. If you just say, well, he's a genius, then you've surrendered the kind of subjective connection to the work of art and you've pulled in the language of authority. The idea of genius and what it is allowed attaches it to certain specific people. Hint, they aren't women. Genius is an exclusive club with stringent standards for membership, not all of which have to do with the work itself. The 20th century image of the great artist is both physical and free, like in this image of Picasso drawing the centaur with light. Eggheads and girls need not apply. Muscular, unfettered, womanizing, virile, cruel, sexual. Our contemporary idea of genius owes a lot to Picasso. With an artist genius like Picasso, the impulse has a vast importance. Without it, he's just a craftsman. The artist needs the impulse, the artistic impulse flowing through him. He needs to do whatever it takes to keep it flowing. When your job title is genius, your impulsiveness becomes the source of what is good in your life. The thing is, freedom and energy can become confusing, morally or ethically speaking. If you are handsomely rewarded for giving in to some of your impulses, doesn't it begin to seem like all of your impulses ought to be honored? Especially because it's so hard to tell the good from the bad. Why would you quash an impulse, no matter how savage or destructive, when it might be one and the same thing as the impulse that allowed you to do this amazing, mysterious, free thing that everyone says is genius? What follows logically from there is the idea that the artist ought to be free in all his doings, the genius artist. Otherwise, if he constrains himself, he might turn off the energy. He might accidentally sit on the muse and squish it to death. The fact that Picasso embodies our image of the genius is not an accident, or maybe it is an accident of history. Picasso's rise was contemporaneous with the explosion of mass media. Picasso became the image of art himself. Picasso found himself at the beginning of a movement, not just an art movement, but the movement toward biographical saturation. If we now live in a biographical moment, Picasso helped launch and also rode that moment. Picasso and the screen rose at the same time. The screen that collapsed boundaries between people. Picasso appearing on newsreels, in Life magazine, in the newspaper. A screen is what created this idea that we knew him and that we had this intimate connection with him. Why does all this matter? Because genius informs our idea of who gets to do what, who gets to have license, who gets to give into their impulses, who we choose to aid and abet when they do indulge in those impulses. When genius is tied to masculinity, a masculinity that continually reasserts itself, then someone is being left out. Which is to say, the genius is not me and probably not you. The genius, as we understand him, is not the person who spends most of her time, and I mean that quite literally, thinking about childcare. My major artistic concern for the last 20 years has been childcare. It has preoccupied me more than any other subject. Even now that my children are grown, I'm still not sure I managed it well. I lie awake worrying about it to this day, and meanwhile, old Pablo was putting out cigarettes on his girlfriend's face. The genius's freedom does not concern itself with the care or schedules or feelings of other people. The genius has license. He gets to do what he wants. The genius's demons can err on the side of insanity. We want to take in this spectacle, the spectacle of the virile, wicked, mad genius, because they make us feel excited and alive. They flood us with a sense of possibility. The possibility of what? Maybe the possibility that whatever infinitude has touched them might likewise infect us. Maybe, too, the possibility that they might do something bad. As we made our way through our historical moment of bitter revelation from 2017 and on, and endless disappointment, I found myself coming to an uncomfortable realization, or maybe just an acknowledgement of a truth that is no fun to say out loud. The truth is that we are interested in and even attracted to bad people. On some level, we want the artist to cross the line, to break the rules. We reward that rule breaking, and then we go a step further and we see it as endemic to art making itself. We reward and reward this bad behavior until it becomes synonymous with greatness. Not just because the gatekeepers and publishers and studio heads have traditionally been men, but because we ourselves also yearn for plot and action. And we yearn for events. And then we are furious when this eventful criminal commits a crime. It's easy to think of the quality of genius as justifying bad behavior, but maybe it works the other way around too. Maybe we have created the idea of genius to serve our own attraction to badness. And perhaps the rotten person needs the art to justify the bad behavior. Hemingway's wife, the artist Martha Gellhorn, didn't think the artist needed to be a monster. She thought the monster needed to make himself into an artist. A man must be a very great genius to make up for having been such a loathsome human being. We ask these artists from Picasso to Jim Morrison to Kanye to live out our darkest vanities. And then if we give it the label genius, we don't have to feel guilt. We can get off on the performance of badness. We can consume the biography and remain in good taste. Well, he's a genius. You can't blame him or me. What to do then? The question keeps rearing its head. What should I as an individual do? But maybe it's the wrong question. Becoming overly focused on what we as individuals do with these monstrous men, these genius men, these free men, these impulsive men, being concerned about what we as individual people do turns attention away from the real work. Let's say there's an accusation about an artist. By immediately responding, well, are you going to throw out the work of fill in the blank? Critics become handmaidens of capital, moving the focus from the perpetrator and the systems that support the perpetrator to the individual consumer. This is the liberal enlightened ideal of individual solutions. People will make good choices because people are inherently good. Turn your gaze away from the system and focus instead on the importance of your choices. In late-stage capitalism, this individual choice becomes irreparably soldered to consumer choice. What you consume is what you are. When it was time to criticize the system in the face of Me Too, to hold power accountable, we remade ourselves in the image of the broken system. We canceled individual biographies, that is. We were shocked over and over by what these men had done and reinstated them in the role of charismatic megafauna, this time the glorious animals transformed into terrible monsters. Their downfall was ultimately a reaffirmation of the powers in place. These guys and their biographies remained central. Meanwhile, I pretend that it matters whether or not I stream knife in the water. In other words, there is not some correct answer unless that answer lies in some kind of collective action. You are not responsible for finding the correct answer about what to consume. Your feeling of responsibility is a shibboleth, a reinforcement of your tragically limited role as a consumer. There is no authority and there should be no authority. You are off the hook. You are inconsistent. You do not need to have a grand unified theory about what to do about Picasso. You are a hypocrite over and over. You love Michael Jackson, but you cannot stand to stream a movie by Woody Allen. You are not responsible for solving this unreconciled contradiction. In fact, you will solve nothing by the means of your consumption. The idea that you can is a dead end. The way that you consume art doesn't make you a bad person or a good one. You'll have to find some other way to accomplish that. Before I wrap up, I want to end with just a few final thoughts about love and beauty. I posited at the beginning that this problem has to do with sort of the greatness or the beauty of the work versus the terribleness of the crime. And one of the things I really wanted to do in this book was to give a voice to our love of the work, give a voice to beauty, give a voice to the importance of art and the importance of beauty. When we're talking about the terribleness of the crime, that is a loud voice that we hear a lot. That's a voice that is very amplified. What's less amplified is the importance of love, is the importance of how we feel about the work. Beauty matters. We don't make decisions about beauty. Beauty happens to us. In a 1995 interview, the critic Dave Hickey distinguished between the beautiful and beauty. The beautiful is a social construction. It's a set of ambient community standards as to what constitutes an appropriate visual configuration. It's what we're supposed to like. Beauty is what we like, whether we should or not, what we respond to involuntarily. In other words, love. It's what we love. Beauty is what we have, this subjective, non-authoritative love that comes from the person that we are, that's individual to us, that we don't try to force other people to love as well, but that is real and that has value. When we talk about the problem of the art of monstrous men, we are really talking about a larger problem, the problem of human love. The question, what do we do with the art, is a kind of laboratory or a kind of practice for the real deal, the real question. What is it to love someone awful? What do we do about the terrible people in our lives? Mostly we keep loving them. It's the problem and it's the solution, this durable and elastic nature of love. When I was young, I believed in the perfectibility of humans. I believed that the people I loved should be perfect and I should be perfect too. That's not quite how love works. In her haunting little book, Love's Work, the British philosopher Gillian Rose writes, in personal life, regardless of any covenant, one party may initiate a fundamental change in the terms of relating without renegotiating them, and further, refusing even to acknowledge the change. There is no democracy in any love relation, only mercy. I would say also that we don't need authority in our love relationships. We don't need the idea of how we're supposed to love work. I think this really echoes how I feel about the person's relationship to the work as well. Love is anarchy. Love is chaos. We don't love the deserving. We love the flawed and imperfect human being in an emotional logic that belongs to an entirely different weather system than the chilly climate of reason. Love is not reliant on judgment, but on a decision to set judgment aside. That's how we love each other. And sometimes it's how we love our monster artists too. Wrap up there. Thank you. And now I'll take questions. Yeah.
I gather quotes, and one quote that has hit me is, you can either be perfect or be loved.
Yeah.
And it seemed to fit in with what you were saying there at the
Yeah,
end.
that's really lovely. Thank you.
Yeah,
I don't have anything to say back, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I also liked a part of your book when you talked about not, I'm guilty of this too, spending a lot of time at work at one point in my career and not with my children.
Mm,
And I wonder if my pursuit of hardly genius, but trying to be perfect in the workplace really took a toll on my kids. So,
right.
you know,
Yeah, I think that, I've thought about this a lot, the problem of the mother at work, the caregiver at work. And I write about it quite a lot in the book when I do turn to the question of sort of monstrous women. What does that look like? And it always looks like abandoning the children. And the book turns into a more memoiristic meditation on how it feels to put my work and my writing first. And I think it's another place where, I too lie awake at night thinking about, did I do it right? Did I do it right? Like as I mentioned here. But the answer isn't for us to torment ourselves all day long thinking whether we did it right. The answer is for more people to perform care, right? We live in this atomized society where our job is where the caregiving falls to one particular kind of person. And so, it's if there were more networks of care, then I don't think we would be necessarily sitting up asking ourselves that, because I do the same. Anyway.
Hi, I'm Michael Donahue. I teach in the history department. I want to ask you, how do you calculate the role of power in these with these individuals? Because one thing that struck me when I saw all of them is that every one of them exercised enormous power within the artistic world in which they operated. To some degree, genius is given enormous power and within its own realm. And that seems to have been one of the factors that allows them to get away with these things or to do these terrible things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially within cultural institutions and within the business of art, of all different kinds of art, there's a creation of power in this person's, this person's given massive power to do what he wants. At the same time, there's almost an infantilization that occurs that, if you think about, for instance, Kanye, as somebody who's given all this freedom and all this power, but he also has power stripped away from him as he surrenders a lot of the control over the day-to-day aspects of his life. And a lot of times people who step into this role of genius and then abuse that power. They often are held in that role, in that position of power by people, and that it often, I mean, this, I'm not saying this well, but it very often becomes paired with a kind of mental illness, and that is exacerbated by the people around them. So their power is withheld, but their disempowerment is simultaneously encouraged, because that's how you keep the guys in position and keep making money. Yeah. So there's a little dichotomy in there that's interesting to me.
Kate Butner, I couldn't have asked for a better transition into the question I was going to ask, which was, I could not stop thinking about Elon Musk as you were talking about the genius. And I guess the question element of it is, do you, like, as an observer of culture, do you feel that there are nuances, differences in how this plays out in the world of tech and business? I mean, you were just talking about the business of art, but like, I mean, clearly there are many, many, many similarities.
Yeah.
And also clearly his assumption of power was much more explicit than a lot of cultural power. But yeah, I would just love to hear you talk about like how you see that model.
Yeah.
I mean, including the mental illness and the infantilization and all of that.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank
I
you.
think that I did think about sort of doing sections of the book that would deal with business and deal with tech and deal with sports, but it does, as I wrote, it came to seem to me that there was this really special relationship between the audience member and the piece of art that they loved that I really wanted to explore. I think Elon is an incredible example of somebody who has benefited from the great man myth and the myth of the genius. He did an incredible job of building up that idea of himself, even as he was on the take, and being, you know, from a long time ago, receiving these massive, this massive government support, right? And so he somehow could do the thing where he could receive support and stand alone as a single man. So yeah, I think he did, as a single person, in that kind of towering genius role. So I think that both his belief about himself and the way he presented it, I mean, I think he really believes it. I think it's internalized. I think he's in like a feedback loop. And of course, with people like that, there's a lot of other people who want to both empower him and disempower him, because if you've got somebody in that position, then you can really make a lot of money. Yeah, whoever.
I was just curious to hear more about monstrous women. Are all monstrous? You said that a lot of monstrous women would be mothers neglecting their child, but are there other kinds? I feel like, I can't remember who it was. There was some female writer, prominent female writer recently. It was discovered that she was aiding and abetting, for example, yes, Alice Munro. That's the person I'm thinking of, right?
Yeah.
So, is that a monstrous woman, or is that a monstrous woman a monstrous woman abetting a monstrous man? Is that one type of female monstrosity? Is there any other type of female monstrosity that's not just neglectful mothers?
Listen, anybody can be a monster, and especially if they, you know, I mean, I think this is a really interesting question about what happens when people who have not traditionally had power get more power, right? Then almost always those people will do something awful, because people are awful. So it's not something that inheres in, you know, one particular kind of person. It's as I think it's Michael was saying, it has to do with the power structure. So yes, there's many, many different ways to be a monstrous woman, and I do talk about various different ways in the book. And the Alice Munro thing is just, it's especially fascinating because the echoes of it or the kind of ripples that go across her work. I became interested in the idea of the abandoning mother because it felt like this is just, I made this up. I have no sort of, I felt that the signal crime of the male monster is rape, right? There's this dominance of the women, this violence toward women. To me, it seems like when I looked at ways that women had been represented as monsters over the years, it had to do with abandoning children. And I think that that's something that we internalize. I am not, I have to do a lot of work in the book to say, once again, I'm not equating child rape with like going to work, right? I mean, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that that women who have left their children behind to go pursue artistic careers, which is something that male musicians and artists do like constantly. When a woman does it, it's a biographical note and we hear about it. And that fear of being the abandoning mother is something that I think female artists live with. I think it constrains, it's an internal constraint. I think we live with the aftermath of it in our lives once we've raised our children. And I think it's an animating fear for women. And it goes back to that problem of there not being enough different kinds of people who do care, right? So if there's just one kind of person who does care, and then that person says, I don't want to do care all the time, then that just screws up the whole setup that's working great for a lot of people who aren't that woman. Yeah. I think this person over here, oh yeah, we'll go to you.
So thank you so much for this absolutely fantastic talk. I have a question, I guess, that's related to the thesis or reflections that you've shared. So you've given us really interesting ways to think about separating the artist and the art. And I'm wondering what happens when the monstrosity it becomes the focus of, enters into the art itself. Is there a way to separate them then? Have you thought about those types of questions,
Yeah.
which does blur over more into, debates about censorship?
Well, I think that, there is, when the monstrosity is reflected in the work, right, then there's sort of a couple different things that we can talk about here. One is a person who has no proven track record of any kind of bad behavior writing about monstrosity. So in that case, we have Nabokov and Lolita, right? I mean, that is what I write about at length in the book. Here is a person who has not, there's nothing. In fact, he put himself in harm's way to tell this terrible story because he created this kind of legacy of being considered a potential monster because he had written this book. And the way that he has become aligned with Humbert Humbert in kind of the aftermath of Lolita and the fact that people won't read Lolita or talk about Lolita and, sort of malign him is, to my mind, I think that it's so important that we tell these monstrous stories, that we try to get after these darkest aspects of the human psyche. So that's one kind of person. And then we have someone, that's sort of like we were just talking about Alice Munro, where you can sort of chase the idea of her complicitness in what happened to her daughter into the stories. Or you can think about Philip Roth, right, would be the classic, where he's somebody who there's a lot of evidence of his misogyny, and then his books are about like the dark heart of the American man. Do I want the books that tell me that? I mean, I do. I want to know about all aspects of human life from literature. That is something I want to know. So I know I'm not really answering your question, but it's interesting. It has to do with sort of, we become uncomfortable when the person's work is so allied, is so near their own behavior. And it's also deeply uncomfortable when the work is really far from the monstrous behavior. That would be what I would think of as the Bill Cosby example, right? So you sort of have Bill Cosby as somebody whose work is so far from what he's been accused of doing. Then you have Nabokov, whose, his work is terrible, but there's no concept that he did anything wrong. And then you have someone like Woody Allen, where the crime and the art are just like right on top. And there's not even a crime. He's not been accused. He hasn't been convicted of a crime. But what we know about his personal story just maps straight on top of the biography. So that's how I divide them. And once again, it's like what you do about that has to do with who you are and what the work means to you and how much you need it.
Hi,
Hi.
Amy Blair in English. I was actually really struck at the beginning of your talk when you were saying that you were so, I don't know, validated or, you know, as a citizen by the way people read your Paris Review piece, embracing nuance, right? And embracing nuance criticism. And
Yeah, those feelings are gone now, though.
well, so it filters through then when we're talking about Elon Musk, right? And then also the idea of he is a genius, right? So he's a genius insofar as he like thinks of ways to go to Mars, but like Jill Lepore recently did the podcast series on him about how he like fundamentally misreads Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right?
Yes.
And then like we know that Peter Thiel and a whole bunch of other tech bros like fundamentally misread The Lord of the Rings, right? And so it made me start thinking if there's like a connection between if maybe it's not just it's not the what we read or the what we consume, but the how, right? So maybe that has something to do with consuming something in a nuanced way, or that, you know, the consumption, the audience's consumption is idiosyncratic, right? But that maybe in general, right, embracing a notion of an idiosyncratic audience is also one of those ways to puncture authority, which is one of the things that gives us the notion of the monstrous. Or
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I
Yeah.
think that I agree. Yes, that that you know that deep reading can be again in a feedback loop with idiosyncrasy, and then we can learn more about what we love, and then we can respond more humanly. I think that there might be in there. I'm not sure. I think it's possible that literature in the context you're talking about doesn't operate the way that you and I think of as literature operating about. So I think that what we're looking at is entire books as a meme, right? So the nuance is automatically gone because it's not existing as a dialogue between me and the writer that I'm meeting between the pages, and we're not just being there together building something together. Instead, it's a signifier that's floating at me. I'm attaching it to myself, and now I'm using that so that it comes back to being about me, so that I mean something. So. Yeah. I think one of the ideas that I develop in this book that I certainly didn't have time to touch on in this talk is the idea of submission. Clarice Lispector talks about this, that that when you're, you know, as a reader, or Shirley Hazard, I think, excuse me, it's a Shirley Hazard quote at the beginning of the book, but that great art demands our submission. And there's this giving way. So not the kind of power structure we've been talking about here that has to do with dominating other people, but there's also this really important thing happening where we're engaging with the work in a way where we're not memifying it, right? We're giving ourselves up to it. We're allowing ourselves to love it. We're allowing ourselves to be in dynamic in it, with it, and we're allowing it to be important in that way. So, yeah. Oh, hang on.
My name is Andrew. I'm a junior here at Marquette.
Hi.
I've written my question down so that I can ask it in the way that I really want to. But given everything that we've discussed about men who abuse power and harm others, how should someone my age find hope when it feels like even national leaders, I don't need to name names, embody that same darkness? What encouragement would you give to a young person trying to stay hopeful in a world led by people like that?
Yeah, that's great. I don't know is the answer one, but I would say this is an interesting book because it asks this question: what do we do with the art of monstrous men? It looks at all these structures, it talks about all this stuff. And then really what I'm saying at the end, and really what I've thought about in my own life since I wrote this book, is action. So there's a lot of, in some ways, there's this, I'm talking a lot about a theory about what's happening between different people, what would a praxis look like? You know, if the way that you consume art doesn't make you a good person or a bad person, you'll have to find some other way to accomplish that. There's like an assignment at the end of the book, right? So to me, the hope is tied to doing anything. You know, and I see that with the young people in my life, and I see that in my life. I see that the more action I take, the more things I do, the more hope I have. And as I do more action, as I'm more involved, the other thing that kind of happens with that is that you start to create community, right? Like you start to be in you have comrades who are doing the thing you're doing. And so that is also like an incredible source of hope. And there is nothing like joining together with other people, accomplishing something to help, at least inside our minds and inside the despair we live inside, you know, that we have, to tear that person down because we're focused on this thing happening here. Yeah. So that's my opinion. That's how it's been and that's not something that I've really written about in this book, but that's been my experience because I've very much lived with that despair. And it really works. Yeah. Yeah.
My question has a lot less depth.
Okay.
So first, I just want to ask, you mentioned a lot of Roman Polanski, a little bit of Michael Jackson, a lot of Pablo Picasso. Who is your favorite, quote unquote, monster to research? And then who do you think, for you personally, was the hardest to separate their art from their, quote, crime?
Well, that's a great question. I could have written this whole book about Kanye. Every chapter could have been about Kanye. The complexity, the Hall of Mirrors, the way that he was, you know, there's just so much there. So researching Kanye and thinking about Kanye was really, really interesting and was also really hard. And so maybe he's the answer to both those questions. I wasn't the right person to write a book about Kanye. And so he ended up mostly I felt like if I'm going to write from my own subjective experience, I'm not the right person to tell this story. But the deepest and some of the most powerful, like, art thinking experiences I had working on it, I mean, I'm just being honest, it was Kanye. Yeah.
So lately, I feel like I've been seeing a lot more people becoming labeled with monster for their beliefs rather than for their actions. And I'm just wondering, like, do you see a difference in how fans react to that? Or especially since it can be so divisive even among fans.
Can you give me an example?
I mean, off the top of my head, J.K. Rowling.
Yeah. So wait, so then what's the question about?
Like, have you seen a difference in how people react to J.K. Rowling for her beliefs versus like Roman Polanski for his actions?
Yeah. Well, they're not just beliefs anymore, right? She's funding anti-trans organizations in, sure. So it's been, because when I was writing the book, they were stated beliefs. And even, you know, so she's moved into action and it's enormously harmful. I mean, the rights that have been stripped from trans people in the UK are very serious and very real. They have material effects on these people's lives. And that's partly down to her. So, but it's true, people were really mad when it was just her belief. And I think that, I don't know. It's really hard for me to take her as an example because I feel like I found her belief so frightening and I felt like I was so seeing what was going to happen and then it happened. So it's really hard for me to be rational on this particular or you know, really see how I can separate out what you're talking about. I think that is the answer to your question. I think, you know, I write about Rowling a lot in the book and people who loved those books, a lot of them grew up to be queer. A lot of them grew up to be trans. There were a lot of people who took solace in those books during their adolescent years when they needed solace and they needed the world to be sorted and they needed to know where they belonged and they needed a world to escape to. And when she started to, I mean, it was before the trans stuff. She already was, she had had some homophobic statements. And she was betraying one of her core readerships, I think, is the reason that the belief in that particular case was so painful. And I know you're asking a broader question, but I'm just going to answer probably. Yeah, thank you. All right, I think that's all of us, all of our questions. Thanks. I guess I can walk off the stage.
We could have kept going for a while there, which was really awesome. So on behalf of AMUW, thank you, Claire, for an insightful and engaging presentation. It was lovely to have dinner with you beforehand. She's so approachable and accessible and delightful, and it was just a pleasure. As readers, viewers, and overall consumers of art, we bring our own biographies together with the artist, and this indeed complicates whom and what we cancel. As you well pointed out, the question of how to love a monstrous artist is really just a piece of the larger question of how to love people in real life, something we can all focus on. We're grateful that you shared your time and expertise with us, and we wish you the very best in your future endeavors. Lectures like these carry forward the Marquette spirit while invigorating our community. Everyone in the audience is encouraged to visit Marquette Bookmark until December 19th to purchase Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma for 20% off. No special code is needed. Just go and do it. For now, please feel free to continue enjoying the refreshments, the amazing company here tonight. Thank you once again. Have a great evening.